Sean Spicer is with us now. He's a NewsNation contributor and former White House press secretary. What did you make of the "I'm very busy" claim? I have a busy life. I couldn't get to these boxes I had planned to.
Well, look, I think, Marni, there's two issues. There's the legal fight that has to be pursued, and obviously that's what the lawyers are going to worry about. And then there's the PR fight in the court of public opinion. And I think last night was about President Trump trying to explain to the people in a variety of different ways. You know, first he talked about all of the various people: Hillary Clinton, James Comey, President Biden, then Vice President Biden and Senator Biden, and why what they did was equally worse or the same as that he did. And then second, he talked about the time that he had to take to do this. So part of this, I think, is to get people to say, hey, wait a second, I don't think this is as big of a deal. I'm not sure that you should be going after a president for this. Is it really something that everyone else did as well? I mean, I think, like I said, last night was about the court of public opinion, not a court of law.
Did he say anything incendiary, though, that could be used against him in this case?
Look, I'm not a lawyer, but I didn't think so. I thought what he did last night was kind of what he should have done, in the sense that laid out the case against him, blurred the lines, muddied the water, and then he actually started to go into issues that the American people are dealing with in terms of issues that they will be voting on. And I think that was smart of him, is to kind of use the opportunity he had last night with all the national attention that most candidates won't get, and take and pivot from the current case and the grievances he has against what he sees as a political persecution, to an opportunity to make sure that he's talking about his agenda and his campaign going forward.
Did you get the sense, Sean, that he understands the severity of the charges being levied against him, that he's taking it seriously?
You know, it's a great question that you're asking, because not only did I work from the White House, but obviously I was the chief strategist at the RNC, worked with him during the campaign a lot. The problem with Trump, I mean, from an outsider looking into the nut of your question, is, you just don't know. Like, he always puts on a good poker face. And so the question is, if he was worried, he certainly didn't show it last night. I think there's two questions. One is he truly personally worried when the cameras are off and he's by himself? But secondly, if you look at the history, right, in terms of accusations and things that have been filed against him, mostly on obviously the civil side, he seems to be, he earned the nickname Teflon Don for a reason. And I think that there's some degree to which he probably says, here we go again. I'll go through the motions and I'll get out of it.
And I guess the follow-up to that is the worry that he would face 400 years in jail if found convicted of the allegation against him. Or is he more worried this will impact his run for the White House and a possible second term? Which is he more scared of?
Well, I think any American would be more scared about going to jail.
But this isn't any American.
If you think about, right. I think if you think about what happened after the Alvin Bragg situation in New York, he came out stronger politically, both in the Republican primary and in his head-to-head against President Biden. So I think if you're President Trump politically, you're saying, hey, at least what we've seen recently is that I get a bump in the polls. People seem to agree that this is politically motivated. So I welcome it. Like I said, I think that any normal person, even if there's a hint of going to jail, would be more concerned. And especially somebody that's lived a life of luxury, the idea of spending a night or two even in jail would be more worrisome.
So the intersection of politics and the legal system are going to intersect quite a few times over the next year. If you were part of Trump's team right now, how would you strategize the communication and the messaging moving forward?
You know, it's a great question that you're asking, because I think that most of the time you have this conflict between the communications folks and the lawyers. The communications folks want to be more out there, more forward-leaning. The lawyers are obviously much more cautious. You brought this up a moment ago. They're very careful that anything you say can and will ultimately be used against you, and so they don't like you talking. I think in the case of Trump, you've got to use this to your advantage. You know he's going to be talking. And like I said, if I were him, I would be pivoting as much in these opportunities to the agenda and the issues that people care about. Because in politics, people don't care about your personal grievances. And I think that's where Trump's got to be careful and balance this. If it's about him, then he's in trouble, because what he did well in 2016 is made it about American voters and citizens and said, you have been overlooked. I am the guy that can fix your problems. I am the man that can fix government for you. As soon as it becomes about him, then people are going to look to somebody else, because we elect people to fix our problems, to make our country better and stronger, not for themselves and their personal enrichment. And I think that's where Trump's got to find that balance.
Right. And if you ask people what's their number one concern right now, how much are my bills costing me? What does it cost to put food on the table?
You guys just,
the economy?
I mean, you just had a great piece on it just a moment ago about how inflation is still such an issue. And again, that's what people are worried about, the cost of their food, the rent, exactly what you guys laid out just a few minutes ago. I think that's what he's got to remember, is the 2015, 2016 race is where he's got to go back to. It can't be about him. And he's at least mixed that, and he said they're coming after me because they want to get you. But I don't know if that's a personal enough message. Most people don't think the government's coming after them. All
right, Sean Spicer, we're going to leave it there. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
You bet. See you, Mark.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.